being toxic. So I'm going to teach you guys 5 steps for not being toxic. So there's a lot of steps that people do to not be toxic, but I'm going to tell you 5 exact steps, or certain aspects. Just five basic steps. So the first one of the most important, is self-control. Now with self-control, the thing about self-control is that in solo queue, there's a lot of people that try to instigate arguments and start fights, which is not really cool, and you don't want to do that because that's just going to get you nowhere in life. That's not going to get you nowhere in the ladder because you're just going to cause your teammates to deter. So cause arguments, that's a bad thing, but what's even worse is responding when someone tries to initiate an argument, and that's one of the worst things that can happen. And so if you give an example, let's say someone is oh, this fucking, let's say I'm playing Lucian, and then there's a jungle pantheon or whatever, he's this fucking Lucian doesn't go in when I tell him to. So there's some examples. I mean, the worst way to handle it would probably be me saying hey, fuck you, I tried to do this, and that would just cause a whole different set of problems, which would put Pantheon on fucking edge. And just because when you see people that are really angry, you don't want to bother talking to them at all because it's gonna make the situation worse, honestly. So just don't talk to people that have that extreme anger mindset. You gotta keep self-control. Even you could do it sometimes. If you let's say someone fucks up on the team, you have to refrain yourself from getting angry and start being a keyboard warrior. That's one of the biggest things. The self-control part is very important. The second thing I want to talk about is called resilience, which, resilience. Pretty simple, pretty standard. Resilience is basically what you could describe as resilience. It's basically thick skin, having thick skin. When people, in the self-control thing, it ties in. Everything is going to tie into each other because that's how it works. But the resiliency, to have the thick skin in order to take all the insults and stuff, makes you a better player, because you're going to be experiencing lots of very negative influences and aspects in solo queue. And that's one of the biggest problems. You just gotta, a lot of people aren't thick-skinned enough, and that thick skin, they get salty after a loss, they don't want to play anymore. And they don't want to admit that they're not playing well, or they don't want to admit that they are making mistakes, and the stubbornness, and those games cost you, and you realize oh, I did really bad that game, but then you let it linger on you. It's like a wound. It's like a wound that stings. It's going to hurt for a little bit, but you have to get up and keep going. That shows resiliency. Getting up, it's how you fight back, is how you get back on the high horse, how you get back into that state is what makes you a good solo queue player. That's what you need to do in order to climb ELO. Base and simple. You gotta stay resilient, stay calm, keep going. Because no matter what they say, when that game is over, you could ignore them and never play with them again. And if you play with them again, you just mute them. Or if they change, that's great for them. You just gotta keep staying consistent and have resilience. And that's the only way to get ELO. You have to have resilience and keep playing, or else nothing will happen, You will not get anywhere. For the longest time, I didn't have any resilience. I didn't do shit. Now I'm starting to grind ELO, and I may lose a couple of games, but I don't care because I'm always going to get back. You have to have confidence and resilience. The other thing is reasoning. So with reasoning I would say is, because people are going to say a lot of stuff, and when you're on tilt, there could be a lot of shit that happens. You could Someone can give you criticism about your play in a way that's negative, that could be irrational or rational. So if the criticism is rational, like let's say you didn't call MIA, but he says it in a way that makes it sound like a dick, like call MIA next time, you shitter. What you need to respond to is like, sorry, I need to call MIA next time. You have to understand the criticism, but not think irrationally to that criticism, because that criticism is rational, but he's being irrational at the same time. Now, irrational criticism would be just random shit like, this guy is so noob. That's what you could ignore completely. That, in order to distinguish reasoning between that and understand how to respond rationally instead of irrationally, depending on the way it's worded, is definitely a huge thing for gaining ELO and understanding your play, because the number one barrier I need to write this down. The number one barrier for learning. Guess what it is? Emotion. If you let emotions get in the way every time you play bad, and you don't have enough resiliency, and you're not reasoning why you did bad, and you don't have enough self-control to keep yourself in it, then emotion's going to get the best of you, never going to improve. You have to improve, think of every situation rationally. Rationalization of this is the best way to improve your skill. And also, all of this ties into not being toxic. You should not ever be toxic, because, like this, toxicity can always respond to irrationality and emotion. You don't have resilience, you'll get toxic. You don't have reasoning what you're going to do. Your reasoning goes wrong. You might say something, put someone off, you get toxic, get reported or something, I don't know. Or like, report this guy. Self-control, keep your self-control. Keep it to yourself. You don't want to be the guy that initiates arguments or the guy that tries to counter arguments in a way that you think is clever. Because no matter how much you think it's clever, when it boils down to it, it is completely wasted space, and you could be thinking about what's going on in the game instead of talking in some useless, very, like, trivial dialogue that shouldn't even be part of the game. Just trivial dialogue that's like illogical, irrational shit that is taking away from your focus and is causing a negative environment for everyone else, because they have to be with those two people on the team that are yelling at each other. You don't want to be those person. So you don't want to instigate the argument. You don't want to join in. You just need to leave it alone and leave it alone. You leave it alone, it will die down eventually. I'll give you an example. One time, I was playing top in Italy, right? I didn't realize that Timo wanted to go top lane, so I installed top lane, and I didn't realize Timo went top because I wasn't reading chat, and Timo was like, you fucking Nidalee, like, let's beat a bitch for reporting. And then Timo and Lucian gang on me, like saying, like, criticizing everything I did. So I handled it in the best way possible. I muted both of them, didn't talk to them for 20 minutes, and then came back and complimented them to try to lighten the ice a little bit, because you have to let it diffuse, because you're not going to want to talk to, let's say, like, you get into a huge fucking argument with your best friend, and you want to let it diffuse for a little bit before you go talk to him, or else it might explode everything. Like, you don't want to talk to someone in inappropriate times, because that's an inappropriate time after they are trying to argue with you, and it's not a good. So you don't want to. You don't want to do that. Leave it alone. And number one, those are my 5 reasons. Those are my 5 reasons on how not to be toxic and how to climb ELO. Leave the argument alone. So let's focus on. Let's go back. So let's look over again. So reasoning's number 1. Then we have self-control number 1. To control yourself when you're talking in the game. You don't want to be that person, like I said. Resilience, you want to have thick skin. You want to have thick skin as much as possible. You want to reason, rational criticism and take it rationally instead of irrationally, because that is the number. Irrational equals emotion, so the number one barrier for learning is emotion. And leave the argument alone. That ties into self-control. You want to leave whatever starts alone, or else you're not going to get anywhere. It's plain fact and simple. Alright, that I'm going to post this up to YouTube, but for now I'm going to play some solo queue soon. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to my queue. So that's what it's really simple. You just gotta not do that. It's just easy. Right, I'm going to upload that right now. I'm going to take off my stream.